Behind me is a section of my garden, and as you can see, I've been doing a bit of weeding. And as I was doing this, an insight came to me about the parallels between weeding and dealing with repressed trauma. And for anybody who is currently in the process of resolving trauma or is considering going down a path of doing that, I thought that some of these parallels might be useful. The first of them is that sometimes traumas can be really easy to deal with, right? Just like a weed, we just pull it up with our fingertips. And I think for certain past experiences, for some of us, just a little bit of tapping, for those who are familiar with the EMDR technique, or perhaps a simple reframing of that experience can be enough to resolve the trauma. And it can no longer present as an issue in our lives. We're no longer going to be triggered by events associated with that earlier trauma. Also, just like with weeds, certain weeds can be very, very difficult to get up. I'm thinking we've had reports in the British press recently about the issues with Japanese knotweed. It can take a monumental effort to get rid of that from a garden. And I think the same is true of certain traumas. They go so deep, the original experience was so painful that the body naturally, understandably, represses that pain, puts layer upon layer upon layer of defense to keep that painful experience out of our consciousness. And in order for us to resolve it, we have to do a lot of work to unpeel those layers, to allow ourselves to be exposed little by little by little to that pain, and then over time, ultimately, to bring it all out into the sunlight, into our consciousness, for us to resolve it, to do any grief that we need to do around that incident, and to ultimately release it from our systems. And I sometimes hear people out there talking about this ability to have an instantaneous shift and to very rapidly resolve old pain. And I don't buy it. I think, as I said, for certain experiences, it's possible, but for many of our deepest, most painful past experiences, it simply takes time and effort to resolve them. That's not to say you can't do it. Absolutely possible, I believe, for anybody to resolve any level of trauma with enough time, patience, and effort to do so. The second thing that I think represents a parallel between weeding and trauma release is that sometimes it can go very, very slowly and then very quickly. We can spend maybe 90% of the effort with no results, and then the last 10% of the effort, just like with weeding, the weed will come out and you'll end up flat on your back. It can be the same with trauma. That's been my experience. You can work away at an issue over months and months, feel like you're getting nowhere, and then suddenly in one session, a whole lot of pain will come up. In my case, I'm in floods of tears, and I can have resolved a huge chunk of that experience all in one go. The third point I would make is that weeds very often have deep and very broad roots. And as they say about trauma, that the issues are in the tissues. And some of those experiences there, the footprint exists, the roots of that trauma exist all over the body. In my case, huge amounts of pain I've held in my hamstrings, and I've held it in my back and my chest, and depending on the trauma, I've held it in different parts of my body. But there's the emotionality of the trauma, which we often sense in our minds. But all traumas also have a physical imprint on a cellular level in the body, and I think that's very much a parallel with weeds. And if we understand that about trauma, I think it's much easier for us to resolve it. And I do believe, I'll end this on a positive note, I do absolutely believe that anyone can resolve any trauma. it's simply about applying oneself, allowing oneself to be vulnerable, getting the help and the guidance you need and the space you need to work on it. But I think we are all capable of self-healing, and we're all capable of getting to a place where we're no longer triggered in the present moment by many of the things that trigger us, because we've done the work on the trauma, and we can get to a much, much better place. So I hope drawing these parallels was useful for people. Yeah, let me know. Let me know what you think. Cheers.